Welcome to a Prisoner's Tale tutorial. We're going to be going through the rules of how to play the game and conditions for winning. The players in A Prisoner's Tale take on the roles of prisoners in a fantasy-themed dungeon. They have heard tale from one of their fellow prisoners and are now racing to escape to find the treasure that is promised in the tale. So let's get started with setup. Each player will be given a satchel to keep their notoriety markers in, a footlocker to hold their resource cards, a set of action cards, and a set of job dice. Notoriety markers represent the player's general standing in the prison. The more notoriety, the more likely the prison population will fight and on a prisoner's side during a prison riot. The less notoriety, the more likely the prison administration is to release the player from prison. The job dice represent jobs available for the players to complete in a given day at the prison. The footlocker is where players can keep their resources in secret. And the action cards represent the disposition of a player on a job and whether he will cooperate or betray his crew. There is also a trustee medallion given to the player who is the current prison trustee. The trustee wields power over the assignment of job crews. He is first in turn order and has priority when breaking ties. Players are able to maneuver in influence and resources in order to secure the office for themselves. The final components of the game are the resource cards, which are organized into 3 resource decks: the castle wall, the guard barracks, and the monastery. These decks represent the 3 locations at Grimtooth Castle, the setting for the game. The 4th location of Grimtooth Castle is, of course, the dungeon where the prisoners sleep. There are minor tasks that can be completed in the dungeon, but in order to gain the most useful resources, they will need to get on a job crew to travel to one of the other locations. Let's get into more detail of the resource deck. The first location and resource deck is the castle wall. This is the most common location to find jobs and represents the players rebuilding Castle Grimtooth's defenses. Resource cards from the castle wall deck have treasure cards, prison cards, item cards, and these all represent assets that can be used to strengthen a player's cards and ability to fight in a prison riot. They can be used to enhance relationships with guards and attack other players, and they can also be used for bribes. The final type of card, and perhaps the most valuable, is the Castle Weakness card, which can be used to start a riot. So players will want to get on castle wall crews in order to get resources to recruit a gang of inmates and fight their way out of the prison. The second location in resource deck is the barracks. This location represents players doing errands for the prison guards. Resource cards at the barracks include relationship cards that have favor values on them. Whenever any player is removing or adding notoriety to their satchel, any player can play these relationship cards in order to alter the amount of notoriety being moved. The amount of notoriety can be changed by 1 marker for every 2 points, rounding down, of favor being played. The playing of relationship cards in this way can even change what was initially a net loss of notoriety into a net gain, and vice versa. Players are allowed to go back and forth playing relationship cards until all players are satisfied with the new amount of notoriety. Other cards in the barracks deck include surprise inspections, weapons, and guard uniform cards. Players will want to get on the barracks crews in order to manipulate the amount of notoriety held by themselves or their rivals. The final location in resource deck is the monastery. This represents players completing pious acts of kindness for the Brotherhood of Rhodes mission located on the prison grounds. The most common type of card are letters from the monks, recommending a player for release. These letters can be played at any time to remove notoriety from a player's satchel. These are also honorifics and relics, and the monks can offer, which can be powerful tools in a player's quest to escape the prison. Players will want to get on monastery crews if they want to convince the prison administration that they have rehabilitated themselves in order to gain release from the prison through early parole. Now let's look at the different ways of winning the game. The game can end in one of 2 ways. The first is in a prison riot. After the last card is drawn from a resource deck, the game will end in a prison riot. This represents the prison running out of supplies and inciting a riot. Alternately, if a player has a castle weakness card in their possession, they can play it at any time in order to begin a prison riot. This represents the prison erupting into chaos once word of the flaw in the prison fortification is discovered. No matter how the riot begins, the process for resolving the riot is the same. All players add the number of notoriety markers that is in their satchel, along with all the number of gold value points within their hand. And whoever has the highest total will win the riot. If there is a tie, whenever computing the totals for each player of notoriety and goal points. Ties are broken by the player who held the trustee medallion. If the person who did not hold the medallion is in the tie, then the tie is broken in turn order, the person closest to the person with the trustee medallion. The second way to be released from prison is the player discarding all of their notoriety markers. This represents a player convincing the administration that he is rehabilitated by virtue of his volunteerism at the monastery and/or with calling in favors with the guards. As soon as a player discards his last notoriety marker, he wins the game. Now let's go over the initial setup before we start the game. As mentioned before, each player will begin the game with a footlocker, a set of job dice, and a set of action cards. A rat, a snake, and a bird. Each player will also be given a satchel with a randomly determined amount of notoriety markers. And that is used in the chart in the rule book. Each player will then be able to select a starting hand of either 2 castle cards or 1 barracks cards. And then the players will randomly determine who is the starting trustee through some random mean determined by the players. Each game round is broken into 5 phases: the roll call, morning schedule, the assemble work crews, afternoon toil, and appointing of a new trustee phases. A winner can be determined at any time when a player meets one of the 2 victory conditions for victory. Play follows in this pattern of all 5 phases until a player wins or until a resource deck runs out of cards, resulting in a prison riot. Let's look at game phase 1, the roll call. The first phase of the game round is called the roll call. Players shake their job dice and roll them on the table where everyone can see the results. The result will have a colored and a numbered value, representing the location and the importance of the job. This phase represents players hearing of rumors of potential jobs and using their inside information to influence the available jobs. The second phase is the morning schedule phase, where the day's available jobs are selected. There can be only 1 job at each location, i.e. the colored value of the job dice. The current trustee is able to discard any set of job dice he wishes, and he can only allow 1 job to each location to proceed to the next round. If he so chooses, he can discard all the dice at his discretion, and players can try and bribe him to select which dice are going to be moved forward. So like in this scenario, if this were the trustee, he would have to choose between these 2 dice if he wanted one of the barracks jobs to go through, and these 3 if he wanted to choose one to go to the castle wall. And he would be cajoling and maneuvering with the other players. Using the previous results, we will say that the trustee discarded these 3 job dice and allowed these 3 to proceed to the next phase, which is the assemble work crews phase. Each of the people who have their job dice left are bosses, and they can elect to have helpers come on their job, any of the other players on the board. They must have at least the number of players as a value on their job dice: 3, 1, or 3. The thief can just take himself, but the highwayman and pickpocket must find at least 2 other people to join their crew in order for their job to make and proceed on to the next phase, which is resolving the job crews. In this scenario, one of these jobs will not make, so they must negotiate with the other players in order to allow them on to their crew. So they'll be trying to elicit help from other people. At any time, a boss can dissolve his job and discard his dice. The trustee also has a special power during this phase. He can have 1 force action, and he can use that force action to force himself onto a job, or if he had a job, force one other player onto his job. At the end of the phase, if players are not on a job crew, either through failure to get on or not being able to find one, then they will be thought of as left in the dungeon and must complete a dungeon task. It is also important to note that bosses can have people more than their numbered value. So the thief can still recruit people even though he has 1. And the pickpocket and highwayman can have more than 3 if they can get that many people onto their crew. The next phase is the resolving dungeon tasks and job crews as they resulted from the assemble work crew phase. So if we use this example from the previous turn, let's say that these 3 players were able to get onto the highwayman's job. The thief had it only himself, and the beggar is on no job. The jobs resolve in turn order. If you are not a boss or you're not doing a dungeon task, then you pass until your boss's turn comes up. So beginning with the trustee, the turn would go from here to here to here, and then to the thief when he would resolve his job. After that job was resolved, we would move to the highwayman, and he and his crew members would resolve this job. And then the beggar would resolve his dungeon task. So let's look at the dungeon tasks in detail. If a player is resolving a dungeon task, he can do one of two things. First, he can pass and do nothing. The second is that he can trade with the black market. He can choose to do one of the following trades. One castle wall card for one castle wall card, one barracks card for one barracks card, or any two cards for one monastery card. The player can only do one of these trades and only do them once. He can pick to do one castle wall for one castle wall, and that is it. Not 2 for 2 or 3 for 3. And he cannot do a castle wall trade in addition to a barracks trade or a monastery trade. He must choose one trade and one trade alone. If a player is on a job crew, then they will have to resolve that job together. So using the previous example, let's resolve the thief's crew job first. Since he is alone, he would select, each job member selects one of the 3 cards. The bird, which is a cooperate card, or the rat or snake card, which is a betrayal card. Because the thief is alone, he would most likely select cooperate. This means his job ends in cooperation, allowing him to get 1, because the value of the number die is 1, monastery card. Then we go to the highwayman's job. Because he and all of his crew members are on the same job, they all must select either a bird or a betrayal card. Let's say they all select the bird card. In this scenario, they cooperate and collect spoils. The highwayman gets 3 cards for the value of the number die, plus 1 for each of his helpers. In this scenario, 3. He would get a total of 6. All of the helpers on his job merely get the 3, which is the value of the number on the number die. The action card is selected in secret, and all the action cards are revealed simultaneously. If all of them are cooperation, they collect spoils as we discussed earlier. But if any one player selects a betrayal card, either a rat or a snake, the job ends in betrayal and no one collects spoils. So let's look at the rat betrayal first. In the scenario where one player selects the rat card, the betrayal is called a lone vermin. The rat player selects a player from among the crew, which would be these 3 players, the pickpocket, carouser, or highwayman, and either adds or subtracts a number of notoriety markers to that player's satchel. In addition, they are able to draw 1 barracks card to put into their supply. And the number of markers they add to the satchel is equal to the value of the number die. In this case, the pirate will be able to add 3 or subtract 3 notoriety markers from either the highwayman, pickpocket, or carouser's satchel. If multiple players select the rat card, the play ends in what is called, a partner up. The 2 rat players would then select from, again, among the players who are on the crew that didn't select rat. But in this scenario, they only select 1 notoriety marker to be added or subtracted to that player's satchel. They cannot select each other, so the pickpocket and pirate must select either the carouser or highwayman each individually. And the player can be selected multiple times. Both players can select the highwayman to add or subtract 1. No player selects a barracks card if it's a partner up. If all of the players selected the rat card, it ends in a tangled web. All of the rat players then add the number of the number die of notoriety markers to each of their satchels. So the carouser, pirate, pickpocket, and highwayman would all add 3 to their satchel. Also, in a tangled web, each rat player would also discard 1 of the resource cards in addition to adding 3 notoriety, in this scenario, to their satchel. 3 because the numbered value on the number die is 3. If a player were to choose a snake card, then if only one player chooses snake, then they select one of the players on their crew, in this case again the highwayman, carouser, or pickpocket, and they look through that player's resource cards and selects the number on the number die, that many cards to take into their own supply. So in this case, if the pirate selected the highwayman, he would look at all of his cards and he'll be able to take 3 into his own possession after looking through all of his cards. In addition, the soul serpent adds 1 notoriety to his satchel. If multiple players, but not all players, choose Snake, then they choose from among the other players, in this case the carouser and the highwayman that are on the crew, and they can select 1 card from that player, but they are not allowed to look through the player's cards. So if the pickpocket selected the highwayman would then just take 1 of his resource cards and give it to the pickpocket. The Snake players do not add a notoriety marker in this scenario. If all of the players were to select Snake, then it devolves into a savage brawl in which each player then discards the number on the job die. They discard that many resource cards to the discard pile. In this case it would be 3. And all Snake players would add 1 notoriety marker to their satchel. So each player, the carouser, pirate, pickpocket, and highwayman, would all discard 3 and also add 1 notoriety marker to each of their satchels. Now let's look at a complicated betrayal with both rats and snakes. In this scenario, we have both rats and snakes played, and we've also added the thief to the job crew. Rats are resolved first, and in this case there are 2 rats, so they resolve a partner rat betrayal, and that they are allowed to select 1 of the other players as their mark to add or subtract 1 notoriety marker to their satchel. Let's say the pirate selects the carouser to add 1 notoriety marker, and the pickpocket selects the thief to add 1 notoriety marker to his satchel. Then we go to the snakes. However, if a snake was selected as a rat to be their victim, then they are treated as if they had played a bird during the initial phase, and they are neutralized as a swallowed rat. So because the pickpocket selected the thief is not able to participate in the snake betrayal, leaving only the highwayman to do a soul serpent betrayal, where he selects 1 of the 3 crew members, takes 3 of their cards, in this case because the value is 3, and adds 1 notoriety marker to his. Had the pickpocket picked the carouser, then the thief and highwayman would resolve a partnered up snake betrayal. The final phase of each game round is the appoint a new trustee phase. Beginning with the current trustee, players are allowed to make bids in order to buy the trustee medallion. They can be 1, 100, 0, whatever the player wishes. If all players pass and there are no bids made, then the trustee medallion simply passes to the left. The only way that the trustee can remain in the possession, in this case of the carouser, is if he makes a bid of at least 1 and is not outbid. So let's simulate a bid round. The carouser passes, the pirate passes, pickpocket bids 1, the thief passes, highwayman passes, the beggar passes, the carouser bids 3, the pirate passes, the pickpocket bids 5, pass, 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 pass. The pickpocket would then have to pay for the trustee medallion using cards from his supply. He had bid 5, so he must pay 5, using favor and gold points at a 1-to-1 ratio. You can use any combination of cards with favor or cards with gold values that must equal 5. If he has 2 cards that value each 3, he must pay those cards and lose the additional 1. But he must pay the amount he bid with cards from his own supply. Once a new trustee has been appointed, then play begins again with the roll call and players rolling dice, proceeding on to the morning schedule phase where the trustee discards job dice. Then we resolve jobs. Then we begin again with the appointing of a new trustee. And the game proceeds and proceeds until one player discards all of their notoriety markers or a prison riot begins. One note on vice and relic cards. Each relationship card with favor points can only be enhanced by 1 card and 1 card alone. Let's take this example. If the highwayman played a lesser encomium to discard 1 notoriety marker, and the pickpocket had these 3 cards alone in his hand and wished to neutralize this card, he could play the guard card and 1 of his blue poppy cards in order to double the value of the guard. He could not play an additional blue poppy card or an additional any card on this one guard. Each relationship can only be enhanced one time via one card. This card must be held back in reserve to be played at a later time. And that's how you play A Prisoner's Tale. Please consult the rules. I hope you have a wonderful time playing the game. And thank you for trying out A Prisoner's Tale.